This is Ken Forster, Executive Director of Momenta Partners and Momenta Ventures. Welcome to our Digital Leadership Podcast. In this series of conversations, we capture insights from the best and brightest minds in digital industry. They're executives, entrepreneurs, advisors, and other thought leaders. What they have in common is, like our team at Momenta, they are deep industry practitioners. We hope you find these podcasts informative, and as always, we welcome your comments and suggestions. Good day and welcome to episode 102 of our Digital Leadership Podcast, produced by, for, and about digital industry leaders. Today, I'm pleased to introduce Ashtad Engineer, Head of Technology, Energy, and VP of Tech and Digitization at Adani Group, a $12 billion infrastructure conglomerate with interests in ports and logistics, power generation and transmission, renewable energy, gas distribution, and agricultural products. Ashtad is a lifelong digital industry leader, having led strategic sales and partner ecosystems at my alma mater, Wonderware, during its ownership by Invensys and later Schneider Electric. Prior, he led the SAP Manufacturing Systems practice for Tata Consulting Services and worked in consulting with Rockwell Automation. Ashtad, welcome to our Digital Industry Leadership Podcast.
Thank you very much, Ken. I appreciate it. Very excited to be here.
It's well past the time to have you on this, and I appreciate the fact that we finally were able to pull it together. So first of all, since I often mention that Momenta loves engineers, I have to greatly appreciate anyone who features this as part of their proper name. So for whatever part you had in actually taking that as a proper name, well done. But let's start with your professional journey. Tell us a bit about your background and how it has informed your views of digital industry.
So I would say my journey is kind of like an S95 model. And the reason I chose the S95 model is, starting from control systems, which, really fascinated on how real-time control works during the PLC days, really understanding how machines work. And then being able to really see that working and the whole boom of, software coming into late 90s and early 2000 really propelled the thinking of, what happens to information after it's generated at that level? Okay, let's see what happens a level above. And this whole operations management space, started becoming very interesting because now you really started to understand how decisions are made, how things are made, and the processes, governing that. And then when you go all the onto the top, you actually have an understanding of the business processes. And the whole shop to top has been, I would say, close to 25 years. I've been in the industry. It's constant throughout. So, digital today is just an accelerator, I would say. But I think the fundamental things about the processes and its associated planning, control, execution, and closing off the loop. So if you really look at, the background of, closing the loop in terms of sense and respond and being able to do that, the closing of the loop happens at every step in the enterprise, right from the control systems to operations management and then to, the business systems is, you've got a planning component, you've got an execution component, and you've got a feedback control component. And today, digitization is all about bringing that together on a convergent path to be, able to solve business outcomes and challenges. So, and I often sometimes, say that, hey, having the name and the degree, allows me to see things in a holistic manner.
Yeah, I love that. I guess looking at your formal education and great control systems education as it is, and then of course all of the work you've done in, I'll call it, large leaders, if you will, in industrial automation and control systems. What inspired you to really come into this space early on?
So as a kid, I always saw my father. By the way, my father is a very well-respected individual in the whole design and electronics R&D space. So seeing my father right from childhood, really, putting it out there in terms of technology, that really excited me. And the whole thing about science on the why aspect of why this thing works, the way it works, that really got me thinking into really taking on to the control systems, aspect. And, it was necessarily excited that, things which you can do, the results are immediately seen. So for example, when I was programming my first PLC, you could actually see, an embedded control, working, and you can actually see your logic not working in a virtualized environment like you have runtimes on Visual Studio when you run and compile a project. But when you actually, take a PLC and program it, and that's really, that really got me thinking and think about the control systems, because in college and all that, we had, the very first generations of that day, Rockwell, Alan Bradley, and we tinkered with that. So that really got me fascinated into real-time control.
I remember one of my first control systems experiences, and this was at Lockheed Missile and Space, and it was a large processing facility. And literally, we set up a Wonderware system. We put a touch screen on it, and it was talking with a PLC. And I had somebody come in and actually try it, and kind of hits the button on it, and the color didn't change on it because we hadn't got that far into programming it. And literally, there's this 500 horsepower pump that you can, or motor that you can hear off in the distance winding up, and he hits it again, and you hear, and of course it finally blows the breaker on it. But you realize the power that is when the kind of the atomic meets the digital, if you will, and how these things come together. And so I laugh, and maybe this is the old guy in me, I laugh when people show me, hey, look, I'm blinking a light on an Arduino over the internet. Well, let me tell you my story, son. That power inspired me, as it sounds like it did you as well. And as I mentioned, a lot of that came out of the early days at Wonderware. So I was there along with one of our advisory partners, Jesse DeMesa, back in the early 90s, actually, when the company was pre-IPO and still about 100 people. I think they were arguably the first really significant company to drive what called the integration of the information technology and operational technology, or IT and OT, together via this kind of human machine interface, they called it at the time, a product called InTouch. How did you see this market leadership continuing during, you were there almost 10 years, I believe, with them? Yes. And it's like, Wonderware is to the OT world as SAP is to the ERP world, and every controls engineer, if you've not played it, Wonderware, it's like, what? Wonderware, touched. It was a part and parcel of the controls engineers, toolkit. Yep. And the whole visualization, I compared that to Apple. If you really see, you've got Apple phones, but the whole systemic user interface design, which Wonderware really created, it was the Apple of manufacturing, of user interface. You call it HMI, you call it whatever names you want to do, but it's the whole human systemic interaction which made it easy for operations. And operations is such a crucial aspect today, of any organization, be it manufacturing, be it infrastructure operations. So I think the leadership position maintained by Wonderware was really out of the box thinking, and the whole concept of being modeling your assets in real time and contextualizing, and people understand today the whole context and contextualization of data. The whole thing propelled where you were able to contextualize and ingest data on a model, and they pioneered that with their user interface. I think that leadership position today is unmatched in the industry. And during my time, there were acquisitions made, but the most notable acquisition was of a workflow product. And
if you really see mid 2000 and the end, it all started really becoming workflow. Now, the whole aspect of business workflows, as BPMN and all those stuff at the enterprise layer. But manufacturing and operations really, required something where you had human systemic interaction. And what better is to complement the operations management system with a human systemic workflow where the operations guys could actually interact with different systems with the channels and the form of communications which they're already used to. Like, for example, Outlook. You could create workflows right into your Outlook mailbox, or you could take workflows, operations management workflows, and push it out to the channels like the chat channels. So that really propelled a new way of information management, especially at the operations space. And if you really look at today, and like 10 years back, operations modeling has always been an afterthought. So if you look at the score models, you have KPIs very well defined, starting from level 1, 2, and 3. But when it comes down, there are no standard way of KPIs. And that is where, it's interesting about when people talk about best practices, okay? Yeah, you could have best practices, but best practices for, one of the customers and one of the, manufacturers is completely different, even if you make the same product, because that's how operations is. And getting down into operations has always been a real challenge, today. And I think the solving of the digital problem is if you are able to solve your operational workflows and the movement of data out there, you are really getting somewhere in digital, Ken. That's my firm belief.
You've actually been a perpetual thought leader from your days there at Schneider and Wonderware and going on. I love what you just described, because I think part of that was captured in some original work you did. What was it called? The Vision of the Perfect Plant: Coordination, Planning, Execution, Integration, and Intelligence. And you wrote that in 2008. More recently, I think you wrote a white paper for the World Economic Forum on cyber resilience in the electricity ecosystem. I guess as I think about it, and I know you've written other things as well, in some sense, those titles kind of describe the changing view of really plant floor systems, or as you say, these kind of operational systems in that sense. How has the definition of the perfect plant changed over the time that you've been writing these?
Oh yeah, so so for the book, I had co-authored 2 chapters of The Perfect Plant, and that was and that's really the time where we were really seeing the real timeness of and at that point the supply chain, you had the advanced planning and optimization, but really to get real-time data on being able to reconfigure your inventory plans, you required that real-time data. And fast forwarding it with the cybersecurity, very honored to have represented my company. We were part of a big a working group committee where I contributed to the white paper. But it really looking at cybersecurity in the whole supply chain. You cannot look at cybersecurity today alone as an organization. And if you really see what has changed over time, so big data, and I often say the biggest influence today started with big data, and the reason I say that is because if you compare big data and transaction data, big data is all about understanding the meaning behind the transaction data, and that today with the advent of IoT, where you have this whole collection of million data points, you are really required to understand that. And today, people don't realize that everyone today is part of operations, whether they realize it or not. Digital is all about business operations. So this whole concept about being perfect. So if you really look at the age-old consulting thing, like as is to be, I would say there isn't any to be today. There is no target reference rate because of the pace in technological advancement. there is no constant to be. You have to be able to constantly validate your processes. You have to constantly look at agility. When I say agility, could I do a business process change today, which would be effective 3 months into production and out to the business, rather than the age-old 6 to 8 month or a year process? So that is where the perfectness of either an operation or a manufacturing supply chain, the perfectness comes in really adapting to the changes. And classic example today is COVID. Post-COVID today, operations need to be either rejig, a different way of working, different way of doing things, decoupling and remoteness. That is where you really require the digital. So in that sense, the same principles, 10 years back are applicable today, but in the context of digital, you have to be, the perfectness doesn't have to be static. It is dynamic at every instant as we walk today. And that is where I see it.
It's an interesting perspective. The no to be, in some sense, you could almost say it's a perpetual to be, in the sense that you're always agile and you're always going to be adjusting, if you will, toward what the ideal state is, right? In some sense.
Ideal state, and that is where the whole DevOps movement with the whole containerization comes in. That now technology and IT. Yeah, I mean, you cannot blame IT today, but there are technology inventions today which are leading it into agility. And what is agility today? If a CEO says he wants to rejig, say, a supplier process, or if he wants to rejig on how manufacturing is done, by the time we look at process interventions and technology interventions, what's the time to value to deliver that? With age-old technology, the time to deliver and value would be like 1 year. Today, it could be 3 months or 4 months, and that is your competitive advantage.
Mm. We've often observed on this podcast that digital industries, we like to call it, is driven in part by the virtualization of OT systems. So you can think about it this way: industrial IoT, as we call it, really is about virtual OT, or the virtualization of OT, such that if you think about the internet and cloud computing, what happened in IT over the last 2 decades has been the virtualization of traditional data centers, if you will, into SaaS and cloud services, right? To what degree do you believe this progress in IT is driving the kind of this, I'll call it, perfect plant, or the perpetual to be, if you will, of OT systems development?
This is a great. This is one of what we have been thinking internally in our organization. But to me, people are already doing virtualization. See, virtualization. The whole BPO industry, IT has been virtualized, and that's really got into the whole hyper-converged infrastructure and architecture with technologies like software-defined networking. Coming down to where we are, there's really virtualization. You still have, and today, if you really, I'm coming from the industrial automation world. There are still soft PLCs, applicable in machine shops. There are, Windows machines being used as for real-time control. How do you take this at scale? And today, the hyperscalers have been able to solve somewhat of the problem in getting the response time down from seconds to milliseconds. And that is why, if you see the investment today with all the hyperscalers, are being done at the edge. So at the end of the day, I really do see progress of this coming in very rapidly to this industry, and whoever disrupts this industry will be the lead follower. So I always say the $1 million question, is it possible to implement control functionality? So for a controls engineer who's done, PLC, DCS and all that, and is it possible to implement the control functionality on the cloud, employing a cloud infrastructure as a service with a comparable performance guarantee as that of a dedicated hardware-based DCS or PLC? And, there are pockets of research today available where there are real-time virtualization engines, hypervisors which are available, low latency deterministic network connectivity, and as this space and the ecosystem within the space have to really figure out things which will help customers get there. So I would say that's one of the big waves in OT waiting to happen, and whoever figures that out will really have the leader advantage. Ken.
Yeah. We couldn't agree more in terms of cloud coming down to the edge and how that is impacting what you might say is the traditional IT OT boundary. Do you believe that? And some people will call it an IT OT gap. We've used that term as well. Do you believe that the future holds an IT OT boundary or gap, or do you see that effectively disappearing as you truly go to, as I think you called it earlier, from shop to top, right?
Yes. So I would say the lines are blurring today. And the reason the lines are blurring today is the convergence today is being fueled by data analytics, decision making, and most importantly, the whole I say this often, it's the return of the nerds. And when I say it's the return of the nerds is, we've been doing advanced process controls, we've been doing simulation models, but now at the breadth and depth of scale of AI and ML, that is really the driver for distributed federated control. Just imagine, today DCS, and that is where, if we can think of, autonomous control today happening, why would I want to do cabling and bring it all to my DCS? Why do I have to have a massive control rooms? You can have OEMs for turbines or boilers or any process equipment have their edge controlling devices on containers, and you hook it up to a master cognitive control systems sitting at a fog layer or at the cloud layer, but ideally at the fog layer, because then you have your traditional on-prem stuff where you can do local time control, but then give the training data to the cloud for you to train your models, just not for the asset. And when I say cognitive, people, just like, okay, Ashtad, what do you mean cognitive? I said, today, all the predictive maintenance IoT use cases are revolved around a asset. You take that asset and you take that predictiveness and put it on the process in which the asset participates. That's where you start getting cognitive. And that's the real, the beauty of what I call the cognitive control system. So I would say, 5-6 years down the line, this would be a reality, Ken.
We have a investment thesis that we call Brown is the New Green, and it effectively says that brownfield applications is where the real money is at, right? Because nobody's going to rip and replace their PLCs and put Arduino boards in there, at least not yet. But that, in some sense, that overlay is that we'll invest in companies that what we call the 3 E's, that will embrace, extend, and ultimately exterminate those systems that they're laying on top of. And DCS is a good archetype for that. So it's ultimately we see the same thing happening, but it just is, it's never going to move at the speed of Silicon Valley or of enterprise IT, right?
No,
because there's really real processes, real lives, real people, real productivity sitting at the other end of it, right?
Absolutely. And always, if you see technology innovation, the embracing of technology, rapid technology innovation happens, comes out of a financial, market. So I'll give you an analogy, like Flash Boys, right? The whole trading thing about trading stocks and getting your puts into from a stock market. If you think about real time control, they require millisecond responses for them to trade, right? So if that technology is being developed to really cater to that segment easily, millisecond and microsecond latency architectures could be evolved down for control systems.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. The World Economic Forum, we mentioned earlier, they've recently used a term called the Great Reset, and in several of our podcasts we've mentioned this in terms of referring to the long-term impact of COVID-19 pandemic. Given the futures discussion we just had, what do you see as the impact of this on the future of OT and your own current business?
Yeah, so we really see, I'll just talk about, we really see de-risking through decentralization, and decoupling starts becoming, very important. So, if you see really for risk mitigation, companies might build a network of production facilities, leaving the long tradition of a single location, large scale manufacturing. Offsite operations, businesses will try to decouple on-site and off-site workforce, right source enabled by technology for business operations, and leverage service models for off-site functions. We're really seeing employee monitoring. Surveys and technology will be used to know if their employees are workplace safe, thereby reducing the dependency of operations on such outbreaks. And automation and robotics, we're talking about that, but with social distancing becoming widespread, use of autonomous vehicles and robotics to reduce human-to-human contact is going to be very important. And I was talking about cognitive control systems. So the next generation of industrial control systems will be designed to leverage the whole AI/ML to enable remote operations and ensure, operational safety with minimal human involvement. So if you really see from a socio-economic aspect of what does it really mean, from a digital, things, because today, take for instance, small businesses around the world constitute around 40 to 60% of the GDP in most countries. Yet many are cut off from the digital economy today, right? How do we as customers, manufacturers, or conglomerates, just not look at what it's going to be from a COVID perspective? It's the whole supply chain of partners and the vendors you're dealing with, and can we take them along? So, for example, like for India, micro economics are going to be very, very important. So, for example, microgrids for local power generation through solar, wind, and batteries, enabling small-scale industries that just create jobs and provide electricity to homes, schools, hospitals, and creating a self-sustaining ecosystem. Microeducation with education tools accessible on mobile devices, allowing schools to provide education without requiring and training of millions of teachers. So this whole thing about micro innovation, if you're able to figure that out, you already have the scale sitting out there. And I think that is where real innovation is really going to talk about in terms of that. And that is why I again come back to why operational data is even more so important today than ever in this whole guise of digital journey. Ken.
Micro innovation. There's a new term. I'll have to check if the trademarks are available. I love it. Pick up the domain before we publish this, right? That's a really good one. So, of course, we're digital industry investors. And so we always like to ask the question, in terms of recommendations of interesting startups. From your perspective, who are the ones to watch out there, at least in this digital industry space?
Yeah, so I'm actually following Kelvin. Kelvin is an open industrial control system. They're basically a very innovative company where they're really having container-based approach to control systems. That's one startup. Another startup is Cognite, which is really and again I come back to operations data. Contextualizing operational data is a long sought after thing, especially for digital practitioners and data practitioners like myself. So taming of the operational data in context with the enterprise data. So Cognite is another startup. They have their PaaS platform. which I'm very bullish about, and another cybersecurity company known as Sage, based out of California. They have actually very innovative blockchain-based approach to identity access management down at the controller level. So and I'm convinced the investment in OT cybersecurity for the next 5-6 years is going to be tremendous, because that is where a lot of efforts are being done. I mean, you could see, just recently Microsoft bought CyberX, an Israeli-based startup for IDS protection at the industrial control, ICS layer. So these are the three ones that come to my mind, Ken, to really.
Those are all. Yeah, those are great ones, and our listening audience will appreciate that we are investors in Sage, and so we featured Duncan on a webinar in the past, actually. But so good call on that one, and we have been looking at the other two as well. So three great recommendations there: Kelvin, Cognite, and Sage. So final question, closing. We always like to provide see if you provide any recommendations of books or resources that that inspire you.
Oh, so the AZ16Z podcast, that's one of my favorite podcasts, of all times. That's what I really look forward to. There are other podcasts on Spotify or Pandora, which I really use, the Data Skeptic and the Data Engineering podcast. Because again, I do believe organizations, if they can understand their data, can really have leapfrog advancements into their digital strategy. Another book which I really like is The Grid by Gretchen Bake. It talks about the whole, grid in terms of the energy future. A great book, to read. Another book, especially where I've requested my team to read, is Mindset by Carol Dweck. It is really today, operational excellence is a mindset that starts with an individual. I mean, technology can help you adapt, Ken, but it's all about integrative thinking. It's about, hey, don't copy the competition, but do adapt from other industries. So really, it's the how do you build that mindset and attitude. And another book really I would, is really which I like, is Life 3.0 by Max Tegmark. It's really understanding the human aspect of interaction with artificial intelligence. And I mean, those are pretty much my books.
And that nice heavy reading, I like that. And you're the first to actually recommend the AZ16 podcast, which I'm an avid listener to as. Yeah, it is great. Believe me. All right. Well, Ashtad, thank you so much for your insights. It's always been a pleasure to talk with another engineer, and especially you.
Hey, I get it all the time. Customs, immigration, my driver's, renewable of my driver's license, right?
I love it. What do you do for a living, Mr. Engineer?
Hey, and I have my daughter becoming a doctor, so just go figure it out. She'll be called as Dr. Engineer.
I love it. It's called, medical technology, I guess. Dr. Engineer.
But
love it.
Dr. Engineer.
Yeah.
No, pleasure. So thank you so much for having me.
Oh, absolutely. No, we've really been pleased. So this has been Ashtad Engineer, Head of Technology, Energy, and VP of Technology and Digitization at the Adani Group. And I'm, as I say, a lifelong cognitive digital industry leader. So thank you for listening. And please join us next week for episode 104 of our Digital Leadership podcast series, produced by, for, and about digital industry leaders. Thank you. You've been listening to the Momenta Digital Leadership Podcast. We hope you've enjoyed the discussions, and as always, we welcome your comments and suggestions. Please check our website at momenta.one for archived versions of prior podcasts, webinars, as well as resources to help with your digital industry journey. Thank you for listening.